Hey everyone, yeah, we're just waiting on some more people to come in. We had over 100 people register, so um, we'll get started shortly.
Welcome, folks who are joining us, and people who are patiently waiting and who joined on the dot. We're waiting for some people to trickle in. We had a lot of folks RSVP last minute, and some folks didn't get the link until like a few minutes ago. Feel free to chat the group and share who you are, share anything about your struggles, your organizing, contact info, and we'll get started like in a little bit. Hey y'all, thanks for waiting. Thanks for your patience. We're just waiting one more minute to let a few more people join before we get started. Again, feel free to introduce yourself, your organizing experience, what you do in the healthcare industry. And make sure to click the all panelists and attendees option if you want to address everyone who's here.
I think it's about time to get started. I know that some people will be late. I'm usually late for everything, so no problem. I'm glad that we have a lot of people here. My name is Jillian Permiano. I'm just going to introduce what we're going to do today very quickly, and then pass it on to Isabelle, who's going to teach the course. So my name is Jillian Permiano, she, they. I am a nurse, an RN in Brooklyn. I work in the emergency room at Wyckoff Hospital, who had the first coronavirus death in New York City. It's a very small community hospital. I'm a member of Left Voice, who is facilitating this training. We saw a lot of also really good medic trainings getting filled up really quickly in the last week or so. We know that a lot of people want to help. And to me, that just shows the true, heart of healthcare workers. If you care about patients in your hospital, you care about them on the streets too. You want to prevent people from getting hurt, not just treat them after they're already hurt, right? So that's why we're all here today. And we're so glad to be able to offer the course. Please introduce yourself with information about you, any information that you want to share, and also your pronouns and everything else. And be sure to click all panelists and attendees in the chat. Feel free to respond to anything that's said in the chat and have kind of a free dialogue in the chat amongst each other as well. I became linked up with Left Voice and this group during the COVID pandemic, which, if we're all healthcare workers, you were all somehow involved in or exposed to. I went to an action at Harlem Hospital, where at the time they were only receiving one mask per week every 5 days to treat patients. And they were in a neighborhood that was basically in the peak of the pandemic. I went in solidarity with them, and also in solidarity with what I saw as to be a working class struggle against COVID. I started speaking to some people, specifically Luigi Morris, who took all of these photos that you're seeing here on the slideshow. And got connected with Trey, who I'll introduce in a minute. And we started talking about how COVID was disproportionately affecting essential workers. We saw the fight of the healthcare workers for PPE as part of a greater working class fight for rights during COVID, for stimulus, for worker protection, for racial equity, against racism from the police who were arresting people. All of these photos here were part of small actions that we were going to throughout the pandemic. We went to Wall Street, we went to Amazon in a great show of healthcare workers in solidarity with the workers there. We also went to the ICE detention center in Elizabeth, New Jersey. We also went to, we went to the first NYPD protest after Ahmaud Arbery was killed, and against the social distancing enforcement law, racial disparity during that time. And basically we started to see the fight of healthcare work. I started to see the fight of healthcare workers against COVID as part of a larger fight against capitalism, racism, and imperialism in our society. So that's why I specifically got involved in Left Voice. Some of you might have got linked into this through signing the socialist healthcare worker petition against police brutality, for talking about how we see the link between our fight, like I just explained, with the rest of the fights we're seeing now. So obviously in the last week, with all of these protests, that connection has become much stronger. And that's why we're all here today. And that's why so many of us are coming together today to learn how to help people in the streets. So I have been protesting since Friday. Luckily, I had a vacation this week, so I've been able to go out almost every day in New York City. We've seen people getting beaten by the cops, especially now in the name of curfew. After 8 p.m., the cops use that as ammunition to take out their frustration on the protesters and beat people wildly. We know that some protesters have already been killed. We know about David McCarthy in Louisville. We know about, I forget his first name, maybe Jamar Floyd, who died in New York 2 days ago. And we also on the streets have seen many broken hands, broken wrists. I saw a broken leg last night, seizures. We've seen concussions. We've seen police beating people in the abdomen, in the back. We have seen, abrasions, lacerations, you name it, we have seen it. I'm a little bit tired this morning because last night I was actually arrested with a group of other healthcare workers who were clearly marked as medics on the street. So there is risk to this. You are, if you're a street medic, they aren't always respecting that right now. We are putting our bodies on the line. But there's also a lot of opportunity as well for jail support medic, which is a very safe way to support what's going on. You wait outside the jail, you wait for people who get out, and then you help them with abrasions, hand and wrist injuries. You do exams and you give, compassionate medical care. I am so excited that there's so many people here today, and I hope that you're able to go out and use this knowledge on the street. We're going to give you a lot of clinical background to be able to help fight this war against the racist police. I'm going to introduce Trey Kwan now. She is also a nurse. She cut her maternity leave early to join the protesting against COVID. And she's here to sort of introduce Isabelle and a little bit more about Left Voice. Thank you all so much for being here.
Hey, thank you so much, Jillian, for that. I'm really glad that you were able to be released this morning, really, and join us. It's awesome that you could do that. I'm really excited too to see y'all. I wish I could see everyone's faces and hear their voices. But we had a response that was really amazing, more than we expected and more than this platform can even really allow for. I'll just briefly introduce myself, and I wanted to share a little bit about Left Voice and why we are hosting this, why these activities are important to us. And then we're going to go straight to the training. I'm a nurse who's worked primarily in adult medicine, ICU oncology, telemetry for the last 4 or 5 years. I actually recently relocated to Argentina. So I am giving all my solidarity and political support from over here. As Jillian mentioned, a lot of us linked up in the Socialist Healthcare Workers crew, which is a newly formed group, those of us mostly based in New York City, primarily in the struggles for workplace protections and safety and rights during the pandemic crisis. As we saw it unfolding, we also saw that it wasn't just a problem that healthcare workers were facing of risking our lives, having our bodies, thrown into the fire without basic, protective gear, testing, but also we quickly saw how our fights were linked with other essential workers. And then more broadly, the newly unemployed and increasingly precaritized sectors, youth and unemployed workers. So we moved from fighting and calling for the nationalization of healthcare under worker control expropriation of bosses and the worker control of related industries, but also to like social demands like real unemployment relief, the distribution of hours, no loss in wages, housing, secure and safe housing for homeless folks, food, testing. So it's been a storm, and a lot of y'all are right there with us, fighting not only in the front lines as healthcare workers, but front lines against racism, racist policing, and working class demands. So Left Voice for me, especially in times of struggle, has helped serve as a kind of political, compass in a way, like being part of a collective of healthcare workers and also a publication that develops a current of revolutionary ideas to help guide our interventions, and also for us to practice our politics in real struggles, a kind of feedback of our ideas to what's happening on the ground to better inform our program and our strategy. It's an all-volunteer, independent, socialist publication. I want to mention three, I guess, pillars or political pillars that are really important and I think operative today. The first one, how racism and capitalism are absolutely co-constituted and inseparable, particularly as we see in the US. And we see this expressed in numerous ways, both in how the police are selectively using and enforcing the social distancing, but also way beyond that. And of course, historically in the United States, cops being, the origins of cops being, slave patrols and people returning runaway slaves to their masters, and also breaking riots or protests by working class and poor folks. So in the context of uprising that we see today against racist policing, we as healthcare workers can play a role to advance the uprising as marshals or as medics or as participants in the struggle, but also because we have a direct interest in the fight against racism and the liberation of Black people and people of color. An end to racial oppression is part and parcel with the end to class exploitation. We don't see the fight against racism as something that waits until we arrive at socialism or something like that. The second, I guess, pillar that is really important to us is the idea of internationalism and anti-imperialism. We, the working class, we don't have borders. Even though we hear Trump and even Biden adopting this rhetoric of blame the Chinese, this is the Chinese virus, of ramping up nationalist ideas, of scapegoating immigrants, of scapegoating people from the global South. We know this is all bogus. This is an attempt to throw salt into our eyes, to remove the wind from the sails of our movement. And we also see that the working class around the world, essential workers, are being thrown to fight on the front lines, but the governments across the world are prioritizing profits, are still maintaining their cuts to healthcare budgets and privatized and atomized healthcare industries at the expense of workers' lives. So we think that the essential workers in Argentina and Mexico and China, those are our brothers and sisters. So the last point that I want to raise is the question of class independence. We see that Trump, the Democratic Party, and Republican Party, of course, their record on the increase of mass incarceration in New York City our comrades are being locked up. They are essential workers, visibly marked in their scrubs as medics. They're still being locked up by a Democratic Party-led NYPD. De Blasio, prior to the pandemic, put tons of money into increasing the presence of police in the subways to specifically target Black and brown youth and immigrant vendors. So for us, it's not a question of that can be resolved by voting blue or even progressive blue, but that what is necessary are more mass mobilizations and class struggle and an independent political party of the working class. So with that said, we're gonna go to the reason why many of y'all signed up for this training, a bridge training for folks with some medical background, for a little bit of some tools that we can use on the ground in this movement that we hope to see advance. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll put in my contact info and also our contact email to the Social Healthcare Workers group so you can be in touch with us. Oh, let me introduce our trainer real quick, and then, sorry. Isabelle Barter is an amazing trainer, been a street medic for 5 years, recently relocated to Portland, Oregon, and has offered her time this morning. So this training started at 7 a.m. for her. We're so grateful for her to be here. Works with the Rochester Street Medic Collective that specializes in providing these kinds of trainings, and particularly with the lens of supporting social movements. Take it away, Isabelle.
Okay. Can everybody see my screen? Okay, yes, I'm getting a yeah. Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to the Street Medic Bridge Training for Healthcare Workers. I'm so glad for everybody who you've already heard from. Thank you so much to Left Voice for an opportunity to do this. Don't mind my cats. Welcome to quarantine. I'm gonna do start off with like a bit of a training period, and then we're gonna do some Q&A at the end. Okay, so a disclaimer. I know that that the title is a little bit misleading, but this is not like a street medic training. Over the last couple of decades, there's been a standardization around a 20-hour street medic training. That's the like capital S street medic training, and that's been standardized in the United States, at least, all around the world, and it's always hands-on, it's always in person, and it includes tons of like skill drills and other practical info. So this isn't that, but that's okay. This is something else, and it's also very important. This is a bridge training meant to prepare folks who already have medical experience for the environment and common mechanisms of injury you may encounter during a protest. So this training is meant to supplement the experience you already have, which, you know, I admit to know nothing about or little about. So you're bringing in that information into the field, and that's valuable, and I want to acknowledge that. So this is just to take you from the clinic to the clinical setting to the street setting. Okay, who am I? I am a former EMT. I worked on an ambulance in New York for 3 years. I'm a 20-hour trained street medic. I've been a street medic, as Trey said, for about 5 years. I've facilitated 20-hour street medic trainings. I helped start the Rochester Street Medic Collective, which started in 2016. I'm a socialist, I'm a feminist, I'm a proud anti-fascist, and I was like, you know what, that's a lot of like info, so I decided to say I'm also a bird watcher. It's really great bird watching season right now, if we ever get out of quarantine. Okay, so a little bit of history. Street medics can trace our history all the way back to the Spanish Civil War, but we at least can trace our history back to 1963, the Medical Committee for Civil Rights, which was a multiracial medic organization that was formed to support the March on Washington. The Black Panthers also took street medicine a step farther and started opening free clinics, which did everything from provide primary care all the way to doing medical research. So there's been many different evolutions. Protest medicine is just one of them. And I want to talk about what the role of a medic is, because I think that this is very important. When we show up as medics to a demonstration to provide medical support, we do that with the understanding that that's our role, and we are going to keep fidelity to that role. That means that we don't agitate, we don't marshal, we don't fill other roles. I like to say we don't create new patients. We're there to provide care and to make the movement safer. That doesn't mean that you can't have another role and then step into a street medic role, or you can't have a designated time where you're going to step into a different role. I know a lot of y'all are planning actions, and of course, it's a very fluid setting. That's going to sort of be a theme today, that protests are very fluid. But yeah, so another important aspect, which I try to hammer home during 20-hour trainings, but I think probably most of you already know, is that we provide care only within our scope of training. And we don't abandon a patient or transfer care to a less qualified medic. We only provide care with consent unless a patient cannot consent. So if you come across an unconscious patient, provide care. We spread calm, and we don't allow ourselves to become a patient. And don't allow yourself to become a patient is another thing you'll hear street medics say a lot. What I mean by that is not don't put yourself in danger. If you're a street medic with a buddy and both of you have gas masks and riot shields around you and umbrellas, and your job is to penetrate into a front line and pull critically injured people out, then you're not making yourself a patient by doing that. If you're wearing a t-shirt and a surgical mask and you try to do that, you are creating a patient in yourself. So you're no good to anybody if you become a patient. So we try to avoid that kind of thing. Okay, I've made some assumptions about you, sorry. But I assume that all of you know basic life support. So I'm not gonna cover CPR or the Heimlich maneuver. I assume you all know basic first aid. I assume you all know to put pressure on a wound, to use sterile dressing, and that sort of thing. So I'm not going to cover those sorts of things. If anybody has any questions about those very particular things, we can talk about that in the QA. I also assume that you will follow proper body substance isolation. That means hand hygiene, the use of gloves, and that you'll help prevent the spread of COVID-19. That means you'll wear a mask yourself, ideally at the very least an N95 respirator, and that hopefully you will try to track down some masks so that you can help with source control. So if you have a patient that doesn't have a mask, you'll throw a mask on that patient if you have to be working with them for more than an eye wash. I also assume that you know your scope of training. I'm not going to pretend to know the ins and outs of all of your medical experience. And I'm not going to pretend to know all the ins and outs of how you can apply that to street medicine. But I do expect, and all street medics, we hold ourselves to this expectation that we're only going to work within the scope of knowledge and expertise that we have. So whether you're an ER nurse or an ER doc, a paramedic, a physical therapist, you know where your skills are, you know what you can do, and you know what you're not trained to do. So I assume you'll come into the protest with that knowledge. Okay, so preparing. So what do you do before you even leave the house, and what do you do before you even get to the protest? It's super important that you make your location and intentions known to somebody. So if you're planning to get arrested, or if you've decided that you could get arrested, someone should be able to feed your pets, move your car to a location where it's not going to get towed. They should have permission to get your kids from daycare or from your childcare. If you're not arrestable, someone should be waiting for a "I got home" text. And if you don't send it, then they should be calling police precincts and stuff like that to try to track you down. They should be trying to contact you. You should write a legal aid number on your body. I probably still have one. Yeah, there you go. I tend to write it places where no one can see except for me, because people have been targeted for having numbers written on their arms. So they've been targeted for arrest while they're going back to their cars and stuff. So I would say at the very least, have a legal aid number written on your body. Ideally, also have a medical contact written on your body. And I usually write the name of the person, and I sometimes write medical contact, just so it's totally clear. Okay. So you'll also never ever run alone. Running alone is super dangerous. I would rather not go to a protest at all than act as a street medic alone. I would say that your street medic buddy should be somebody that you know, but it doesn't have to be. If it's somebody that you don't know, you should be spending extra time up front to get to know everything about that person's strengths and weaknesses, what their training is, and that sort of thing. And it's important to know too, if your buddy gets injured and it's very clear that they're going to get arrested, you have a duty to stay with them. They're your buddy, you know. So it's very important to go through. I'm going to talk about PEARL, which is an acronym for what you say to your buddy before you get started. But it's also super important to be honest. If you say that you're arrestable and you and your buddy are acting in a way like you're treating people on the front lines, some of those people on the front lines might be getting arrested and you're risking arrest yourself. If you are saying that you're arrestable and so is your buddy, and at the last moment you panic and freak out and run away, then you're sort of abandoning your buddy. Well, you are abandoning your buddy to get arrested, and you're also turning yourself into a solo person. So make sure that you're honest. I always err on the side of caution. If I think that there's any chance I might be danger adverse, I say that to my buddy and I say, hey, let's agree to not get arrested. Let's agree to be backline medics. Let's agree to move away. So PEARL. PEARL is an acronym that we use. It stands for physical strengths and vulnerabilities, emotional strengths and vulnerabilities, arrest or assault risk, roles, and then level of training and loose ends, like other loose ends. So physical, an example of this might be, I will tell my buddy, hey, my physical strengths and vulnerabilities are, you know, I'm able-bodied, I have no medical conditions, no prior medical conditions, but I haven't eaten all day, and so I can't be out too late. That's one. Emotional strengths and weaknesses. You might say to your buddy, hey, I'm a veteran. Flashbangs really are not all right for me. And if there's a flashbang, I need to get out as quickly as possible. Or you might say, yeah, I am a total like trauma junkie and I'm going to be right there in the thick of it. I don't care if I'm getting pepper sprayed and tear gassed, you know. Well, ideally you won't be doing those things, but okay. So that's like emotional strengths and vulnerabilities. Then arrestability or assault risk. This is how much danger you're willing to put yourself into. If you're willing to put yourself like toe to toe with a police officer, whether that means you're going to get hit with a baton or not, to protect a patient, and your partner's only willing to get close enough to smell tear gas in the air, you two either shouldn't be buddies or you should both decide that you're going to be backline medics. Then roles. Typically, one medic buddy is going to treat a patient while the other medic buddy stands sentinel. So they're going to be looking out for any dangers, any changing situations. That's part of the reason why we run in pairs. So if I'm treating a head wound, my head is down, I'm looking at my patient, I'm paying attention to the sterility of the wound, and my buddy is looking around, making sure that I'm not going to get ambushed by police or whatever. And then loose ends is kind of what I was talking about before: kids, pets, plants, cars, your biggest fear in a protest. So yeah, that kind of thing. And then the last one here is something I got from the Do No Harm Coalition bridge training earlier this week, which has a ton of super great information I had never really thought of putting into training before. But a clinical line, I super love this this definition. Like a clinical line being either like a frontline medic or a backline medic. So I think that that's great. Whether you decide which you decide to do, either be on the front lines or be on the back lines, is going to be partly based on your arrestability and your danger level and that kind of stuff. It's also going to be about what supplies you have. Backline medics typically have huge packs like this, and we carry everything from, you know, Band-Aids to bullet treatment, you know, to gunshot wound treatment. So it's like, that'll be partly how you decide. Okay, so what to wear and what not to wear. This is an interesting question. It brings up questions about whether to mark up. I always mark up. I always try to clearly mark myself as a medic. I've heard reports that police are targeting medics. I think that that's absolutely true. We just saw this last night in New York City. I mean, Jillian, you were there, like, you know, but at the same time, I think the police target everyone. And I think that they are just completely indiscriminate. I haven't seen a lot to suggest that they specifically target medics. But yeah. There was one incident where they targeted a medic tent, raided it, slashed all of the water bottles with a knife, and I've only heard of that once, but it's an escalation that I don't think we're going to see the last of. So I think Trey said it earlier. Street medics, we go there at our own risk, knowing that our goal is to lower the overall risk of the action, whether that means we increase our personal risk or not. Okay, so this is not an exhaustive list, but it's meant to be like a baseline of what I wouldn't want to go out without. So an N95 mask, a gas mask if you have it. The police have been using tear gas quite a lot more liberally than I'm used to in the United States. Safety glasses or goggles. If you wear glasses, make sure you get goggles or safety glasses that fit over your glasses, because glass, like, police have been targeting people's faces and eyes, and glasses are not a good idea for that. Wear long pants and wear sturdy shoes, but shoes that are comfortable enough to be in all day. And then police have been using LRADs. It's I'll get to it later, but it's basically a sound cannon. And so I'm recommending everybody wear earplugs, or at least bring them with you. I have earplugs that are like on a string, and I just hang them off my pack. So that works out really well. Okay. So frontline medics, backline medics. I'm going to do a little show and tell of what my pack looks like, just so that everybody can kind of get an idea of, like, you've probably all seen street medics around, but it's hard to know exactly what you can expect a street medic to actually have. So when I'm acting as a frontline medic, I carry bleeding control and water. And that's pretty much it. As much water as I can carry, and then, you know, bleeding control stuff. So roller gauze, antibiotic ointment, Band-Aids, that kind of thing, gauze pads, medical tape. When I'm acting as a backline medic, which is where I prefer to be, this is my pack. So I have two different, here, I'll just pull everything out. So I have two different musculoskeletal kits, which have aluminum bandages or aluminum splints, ACE bandages, other kinds of like wrist splints and stuff like that. And then triangle bandages, which I use to immobilize limbs. I have two different circulation kits. One's for minor circulations, one's for major circulation. And the real difference is mostly the size of things. And also I have tourniquets in my major circulation kit. Although, I mean, don't use a tourniquet if you don't know how to use a tourniquet, and also when not to use a tourniquet, which is probably 90% of the time. I have an environmental kit. So this has heating and cooling. It's got cold packs and emergency blankets. I have a miscellaneous one too. So that's got cough drops. This is where I'll keep hard candy in case somebody's having a diabetic episode. I also keep moleskin, Q-tips, just like any random little things. I also have trauma shears, water, saline, wound wash saline, EpiPens, medicine like Tylenol and ibuprofen, Narcan. I mean, it kind of, the list goes on, and I can give people a list of everything in my pack. I've got that listed out. So it can be quite a lot. So clinical versus street medicine. Now we're kind of getting into the heart of it. I've worked as an EMT, but I've never worked in a hospital. So I can't say for certain what it's like to work in a hospital. But I've worked adjacent to hospitals for quite a while. And clinical settings, I would describe as probably controlled chaos. Everybody's really working together for the same goal, but the environment mostly doesn't change. The personnel changes infrequently, and your supplies are in the supply closet, and there's a person whose job it is to bring them and restock them and that sort of thing. Demonstrations couldn't possibly be more different. They are dictated by an enemy that is trying to cause chaos and panic. The enemy's goal is to make you, as a street medic, effectively less effective. So the movement of protesters and police, it's very difficult to predict. And supplies are often tied to a particular person. Yeah, hang on one second. Oh, okay, yeah, I'm gonna answer questions at the end if that's okay. Yeah, I'll do that. And if I'm going too fast or too slow, can one of the other panelists just let me know? Because I can't actually see the other Q&A. You can just send me a message on, and I'll get that, okay?
I'll take a running list of the questions as they pop up. And
oh, that's awesome.
Later.
Okay. Everybody's good? Everybody's feeling okay? I was planning on just kind of taking a breather in a couple of slides just to hang out for a second. Okay, so yeah, so there's sort of there's a chaos to street medicine, but there's also a democracy to street medicine, which I really, really love. I was just talking to a street medic in Rochester who had a patient go unconscious at a demonstration in Rochester. And she performed a 7-person carry with 5 people that she had never met before. I mean, that's what a protest is really like, what the heart of a protest is. And so the people around you, every person around you could become a patient, but every person around you could also become a set of extra helping hands. Okay, so police tactics. This is probably the biggest difference between a clinical setting and the protest setting. Typically in a clinical setting, you don't have police shooting tear gas at you or trying to arrest you or that kind of thing. Although this is America, so. The purpose of crowd control tactics, and this is not even close to an exhaustive, comprehensive list, but the purpose of all police tactics for crowd control is to cause fear and compliance. So they're either trying to disperse you or they're trying to contain you. And as street medics, we have this saying, spread calm, and we say it a lot because calm is our greatest weapon against the fear and compliance that the police try to instill in us. So the tactics that they use most often, in my experience, are these kind of 3. One is corralling or encircling. So if you have a block like this, then the police will, the police will kind of create a box like this, where you only have 2 exits here. And then you'll have to go that way. And then off over that way, there might be more police who are going to do targeted arrests. Encircling would be if they were to cut off right here and just take the whole park. And whoever gets away, but most people are going to stay in the center and risk arrest. And then there's advancing and blitzing, which again, we can look back on this. So the police line will be here and the crowd will be here, and they'll push through, typically with their batons and shields out, and they'll push forward, and typically they'll shout something like move, 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 and they'll try to push through the crowd and get people to move that way. That would be without riot control weapons. And then blitzing is another kind of example of that, where typically they'll have you on one street and the police line will be advancing up that street and they will run at you, typically with batons and shields as well. These are all good things to try to avoid. Largely, a sufficiently large crowd will avoid, in my experience, both of those things pretty well. One thing that has been particularly effective in my experience, and I don't have a name for it. I don't know exactly what it's called, but I call it like a break line and grab. You'll have a police line and you'll have a group of police behind the police line. And the police will be shoulder to shoulder, arm in arm, shield to shield. And then every once in a while, the police will break ranks. A group will come through the line, grab someone, and pull them back behind the line, and then the police line will reform ranks. So that's one of the dangers of being right up against the line. But I've seen that quite a lot, and it's very effective at causing a lot of insecurity in the crowd. Okay, so that's sort of the situational awareness piece. And from now on, I'm going to start to talk about treating patients. So if we want to, is it all right with everybody if we take like a 5-minute break? Is that cool? Is that all right? Okay, cool. I know we didn't plan that. I'm so sorry. It's just such a good idea, you know, that I had. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, okay, cool. Well, I'm gonna stop screen sharing so somebody else can, if I can figure out how to do that. Okay, and I'll see you all in 5 minutes.
Sounds good. So for folks who are sharing questions, we are compiling a list of those questions for the resources. We can for sure share, ask Isabelle if she's down with sharing her slides to the email list. And, oh, recording. We couldn't get the live stream going this morning. We're gonna do this training tomorrow. And we will live stream on the Left Voice Facebook page. That will be like available. So just check back in there, maybe like Sunday, and it'll be there for you. That will include like slides and some of the discussion. So we'll wait for a few more minutes, bathroom break, mate break, coffee, whatever.
Repack your pack break.
I was gonna say breaks are great, especially those of us working in hospitals. They're very rare. All right.
Yeah, I wish somebody would give me just a 5-minute break once an hour. That would be so nice, right? If you could just pee and breathe for 5 minutes once an hour, that would be so cool.
Or 10 minutes, and then you could pee and then breathe, and you don't even have to do them at the same time.
Personally, I'd like a 30-minute break per hour.
So just as a demonstration for people while we kind of wait for that 5 minutes to come up, we're going to talk about eye washing later. I'm going to show you guys the proper technique to wash eyes. This is law. It's liquid and acid and water, and I super recommend people do not use it, and I'm going to explain why. This is a demonstration of why. I just shook this. So it's 7:59 right now. Oh, for me, it's like 8 o'clock for me. Okay, so it's basically the hour. I just shook this, and at the end of it, I'm going to show you guys what it looks like after just 20 minutes or so of just sitting. Okay, so a little demonstration to show why I don't use law anymore and why I'm really sad that street medics, it's my fault. It's our fault. Why I'm a little bit sad that street medics have for so long preached it. So I'm going to preach pure water. But yeah. All right. I'm going to get started in about a minute.
This has been so good.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Oh, really? Oh, man. You? I haven't even gotten to tear gas yet. Okay, let me share my screen. Oh man, right on cue with that slideshow, by the way. All right, so I know that people are still kind of trickling back in, but we're gonna start by kicking back in. If you are an EMT, a paramedic, you know, an intake, like somebody who works in the ED or something like that, you're probably pretty familiar with all of this stuff, but I'm going to go through it just because there may be some of you who are maybe don't work in emergency medicine, and so for you this is going to be some like easily applicable information. Okay, so these are the steps I follow every single time I take a new patient, except for an eye wash. We're going to talk about that as well. So I go through these steps. I say, assess the scene. Is the scene safe? And so I look around. Is there broken glass on the ground? Are there armed fascists surrounding my patient? Are there armed fascists in blue uniforms surrounding my patient? Is there a cloud of tear gas? What's going on? So, or is it totally safe? And I have a pregnant woman, about to pass out, leaning on a porta potty. This has happened. So, that's a pretty safe scene. She's nowhere near anything, but she might be having a hard time. So, once you've assessed that the scene is safe, proceed. If you assess that the scene is not safe, do not proceed. If you have to go over a fire to get to your patient, don't go over that fire to get to that patient. I'm not saying that that person is a lost cause. I'm saying that if you can't get to that patient safely without putting yourself in danger and injuring yourself, then you cannot treat that patient. What will happen is you'll have two patients, yourself and that patient, and you'll have done no good. Okay, BSI, wash your hands, carry hand sanitizer if you can find it. Well, you all probably can right now. Carry gloves. I carry nitrile gloves. And right now, BSI means a mask, an N95 at the very least. Do not become a COVID patient in the same way you won't become, in the same way that I say don't become a patient of physical harm, okay? Introductions. I always say, hey, I'm Isabelle, I'm a street medic, I'm an EMT, can I help? That's what I say. Hey, I'm Isabelle, I'm a street medic, I'm an EMT, can I help? Goes through who I am, what my role is and why they should trust me. They should trust me just because I'm a street medic, but I say I'm an EMT too because I am. So there you go. And what kind of care I can provide for them. And it also asks for consent. Is it all right if I treat you? Some people, even in severe distress or who appear to be in severe distress, will say, no, absolutely not. I have seizures all the time. Just leave me alone. My friend has already put my, taken my keys out of my pocket, gotten the stones out from around my head, that kind of thing. They already know that they're safe. Or they may be undocumented. They may be, somebody who has an arrest record or something like that, and they don't want to interact with anybody that they don't know. Perfectly valid. Obviously, you don't need consent. There's implied consent if somebody is nonverbal. So yeah. Then we do sample. So we look for signs and symptoms. We ask them for allergies, medication, any pertinent past medical history. Some of these things are not super necessary or not, you might not have time for all of these, but definitely always ask for allergies. Always ask for allergies, always ask if they've had a head injury. Last oral intake, these are all very EMT sort of things. And then events or leading up to the injury or mechanism of injury. Then assess ABC, airway, breathing, circulation. First, are they breathing? Typically, if they're talking to you, you've already assessed their airway. So that's great. Breathing, if they're talking to you, you've already probably assessed their airway. And then circulation, look for major bleeds, look for wet spots. Some people who go to protests heavily armor up. So it might not be completely obvious that they've got a major bleed. And ask them, are you bleeding? When you ask somebody, are you bleeding? And they don't think that they're bleeding, quite often what they'll do is they'll go like this. I don't think so. Like they'll start patting themselves. Wait, why are you asking me if I'm bleeding? That kind of thing. So that's good. And then the last one is super important. As street medics, as an EMT, I feel like I should be able to do anything. The fact is, I don't have an ambulance waiting 100 yards that way. I don't have a paramedic with me. I'm not taking a person to a hospital. So we cannot fix everything. Activate EMS if you need to. But when you do, never mention a protest, never mention the exact mechanism of injury. So you say, I have a patient with a gaping hole in their chest. You don't say, I have a patient who's been stabbed. Or you say, I have a patient who might have a concussion and has a blunt force injury to their head. You don't say, I have a patient who was antagonizing the police and got hit in the head with a baton, and he's my comrade, and I just want the best for him. Like, you don't need to give them your sob story. Just make sure that they'll send somebody to come, because quite often if they know you're at a protest, they won't come. So get them as far away as you realistically can. Okay. Here are your two patients. I say this, it's a broad generalization. Somebody in the comments section is gonna tell me that this isn't true. But in my experience, 80% of my patients are eye washes. If you consider a patient somebody that I have had an interaction with. So 80% of my patients are eye washes. That means I'm doing an absolute ton of this, like eye washes. And I'm gonna explain eye washes after this. 20% is everyone else. And an important caveat, like I said before about your buddy, if your buddy is doing eye washes, you can do eye washes, right? You can both do eye washes and still be elbow to elbow with one another and kind of double the effectiveness of your little eye wash station. If your buddy is handling a medical emergency that is not eye washing, this is just me, I wouldn't do eye washes. Because if that patient goes south and my buddy needs immediate hands, I don't want to be busy or distracted. I want to be, right there keeping track of my buddy. So eye washes, I'd say, are fine. Do them together. But anything else, don't do eye washes at the same time. And don't treat two patients at the same time. Okay, so the proper way to do eye washes is with pure water. You should get water bottles with a sport top. I really like that. If you can't find bottles with a sport top, that's okay. You'll find these kinds of water bottles all over protest actions most of the time. You just have to figure out a way to poke a hole in the top, and that's usually okay. I did say earlier, don't bring knives. I have had many creative ways to poke holes. I've used belt buckles, a bunch of different things. Safety pins can work if you really get at it, but figure out a way to poke a hole. And the proper way to do an eye wash is to have the patient tilt their head back, open their own eyes. This prevents you from having to change your gloves between every patient. You start at a downward angle, like an angle from like hold the water bottle at a shallow angle, kind of across the person's face. Is it I don't know if this is clear. This is a lot easier in person, I'll tell you that. But a shallow angle that's going across the person's face at kind of the angle of their nose bridge to their ear. You start and with a quick motion, go across and sort of flick from their nose to their ear. It's important that the person pushes their head backwards, because that is going to get the most flushing effect. But yeah, so you'll do the first eye. I usually do like 1, 2, 3 kind of flicks, because I don't use too much water in each of those little ones. And then I'll do the other eye, 1, 2, 3, and then get gone. Like I don't keep an eye washing patient to talk about our day. So that's how I do an eye wash. Here you can see that I chose a picture where somebody is using a bottle with a nozzle. I think it's a cool idea. I've never used one of those. I always use a sport top because I've really got the pressure dialed down. So that's just my approach. But if you want to get one of these sort of nozzle bottles, go ahead. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about police weapons. This is a little bit of a scary section. If you guys have been watching the news, you've probably seen quite a lot of these. I was a medic at Standing Rock. I've seen some of the worst of these. Yeah, so I'll go through them pretty quickly because we've already been chatting for quite a while. But okay, so tear gas has 2 active ingredients. I was a chemistry major in college. I don't like pronouncing the names of them, but just know that it's a powder that then is suspended in air. It's aerosolized. That powder gets on your skin, it gets on your clothes, it gets on everything. The mechanism of injury is that it gets in your eyes and it reacts with the water in your eyes and in your ears, nose, and throat. Interestingly, I never wore an N95 mask in the past. You know, I've always worn a bandana. But now because of COVID, I wear an N95 mask because I'm treating patients. I'm right in their face. I want the most protection I can possibly get, right? I've noticed that tear gas doesn't affect my ears, nose, and throat at all with an N95 respirator on. So there's that. So that's kind of a cool coincidence. Thanks, COVID, for helping me discover that. Symptoms are lacrimation, skin and mucous membrane irritation, respiratory distress. I should also say that with all of these weapons, trauma is a symptom. Somebody might not have inhaled very much tear gas, but the fact that they have the inability to breathe as well as they normally want to can trigger a panic attack. It can trigger PTSD. So be on the lookout for those things as well. Treatments, eye wash. Yes, tear gas reacts with water, which means at the very first instant you start to eye wash somebody, they're gonna like flinch. They're not gonna like it because you're adding water to their fire, essentially. But moments after that, you'll have physically washed away so much of the tear gas chemical from their eye that they'll start to feel better. That's another reason why I do this kind of like 3 flicks sort of thing, because the first one kind of gets off a fair amount, and then the second and third one sort of does a sort of gets rid of that even more, so that in the end, by the third one, the concentration of that chemical is very low. I also carry with me saline. I carry with me, well, if I can find it, hang on. Here we are. I carry with me wound wash saline. And wound wash saline specifically is, it's pure, it's isotonic, which means that it is just purely saline. That's it. It's sterile, it's pressurized, it's made for washing wounds, and it is beautiful for washing your eyes. If you are having tear gas, if you've been tear gassed or pepper sprayed and you've been treated with just water and you get a saline spray, it's like, like, so it feels so good. So I carry that with me only for, typically for younger folks or older folks, or people who are really having a very traumatic experience to the tear gas, where there's a bit of a psychological effect to like a magic cure. And this I know is safe. It's not going to scratch your cornea. Yeah. So it's essentially the same for pepper spray. The real difference between pepper spray and tear gas is that pepper spray is an oil. It's sticky. It's gross. It gets everywhere. It coats your whole face. It coats your whole hands. It's pretty terrible. And it's not a bad idea to carry baby wipes to actually get it off of your hands. It's not a bad idea to carry baby shampoo and use water to wash it off of your hands, wash it off of your skin. I like carrying those things specifically for pepper spray. It's also a lacrimator. It works pretty much the same way as tear gas as far as its chemical reaction. Yeah, so same idea for the mechanism of treatment. You wash with copious amounts of water. That's it. The water will dilute the chemical on your eye, and it will eventually get rid of it. Yeah, no magic cure. A lot of people nowadays are using baking soda. I have the same problem with baking soda as I have like baking soda in water. I have the same problem with baking soda in water as I have with law. That's that it separates. The baking soda falls to the bottom unless it's like a perfect mixture. And that baking soda is it's crystalline and it can scratch your cornea. Same thing with law. It's crystalline and it can scratch your cornea. And the last thing you want to do is cause more irritation or permanent eye damage to a patient. Okay. Rubber bullets are probably the next most, maybe not the next most common, but certainly the next most important. So the mechanism of injury is kinetic. It's blunt force trauma. It impacts with extreme force. They are meant to strike the ground and then come up and strike a crowd. But I do not see that being the way that the police use them. In my experience, the police target you directly. They typically shoot you directly in the leg, in the arm, in the face, in the head. And it can cause death. It's if you get hit in the head with a rubber bullet. They have a lot of kinetic energy, and they are absolutely not made for being shot directly at people, especially at close range. Luckily, most of the time people get shot with a rubber bullet. They get bruising, avulsion, sometimes a scrape that you might have to control some bleeding on. If they get shot in the face, that's when you're talking about eye injuries, which have already, since the protest started last week, led to more than one person losing an eye. I've never told people before pack goggles. I've always thought that was an impediment because goggles will not protect you from tear gas. They can minimally protect you from pepper spray, but they won't protect you from tear gas. And so I've always thought of goggles as being a bit of a distraction that makes it harder to treat somebody for tear gas. But I'm fairly disgusted to have to say that I want everybody to take to carry safety glasses and goggles. If you wear glasses, wear goggles over them, because I don't want any of you to lose your eyes. I don't want any of your patients to lose your eyes. It's disgusting that police are doing that. So what do you do? What the treatment is, you stop any bleeding, you cover any open wounds. If somebody has a bruise, I like to say, oh man, that's a nice one, because I can't do anything for it mostly. I could, you can give them an ice pack if you bring a bunch of those. You can give them Tylenol or ibuprofen. Obviously make sure that they don't have any contraindications for those medications. But for the most part, at a protest, I don't really have a lot to treat a person other than an ice pack. However, always assess do an assessment for concussion. So AVPU, like alert verbal pain, unresponsive. Make sure that a patient knows that they are A3 basically, so they know where they are, they know who they are, and they know what year it is. If people can't answer those questions, you might have a more significant mechanism of injury or you might have a more significant injury than you had originally thought. Okay, stun grenades. The worst injury I have ever seen was caused by a stun grenade. That said, I have rarely, if ever, treated somebody for an injury related to a stun grenade. So the issue is that they are a grenade. They explode. They explode in a kinetic and thermal reaction, which means that they send shrapnel all over the place. I call it here debris, because shrapnel implies that it's like made to cause injury, but that's not really the case. It's usually low kinetic energy, plastic shell that goes around it. But the place where it's really, really bad is if it explodes very close to your skin, in which case it can cause very traumatic burns. I mean, it's an explosion. So in that case, you can have burns, you can have major skin loss, you can have major open wounds. And that's what happened to a protester at Standing Rock. A stun grenade was shot, and she was wearing a plastic jacket, or a jacket that was made of plastics. The stun grenade burned into her jacket and got stuck and then exploded. And she almost lost her arm. Yeah. There's another time when a flashbang was thrown into a baby's crib when police did a no-knock raid on the wrong house. And that child had severe burns to their face. But those are very, very rare. I don't expect those kinds of injuries. If you do see them, call EMS immediately. They're nothing to play around with. Burns are very time sensitive. So yeah, cover scrapes and bruises, treat burns, like any minor burns if somebody, and this goes for tear gas canisters as well. Protesters will quite often try to take a tear gas canister and throw it back at the police. And while that makes a super cool photo, it will burn your hand. And that it's pretty much on fire. So unless you have gloves on, if you throw that back, even if you just hold it for a couple of seconds, you're probably going to get a burn, sometimes pretty nasty. So you'll have to treat burn wounds sometimes with tear gas as well. Okay, LRAD, I mentioned this earlier. Its mechanism of injury is, I said energy because that's what the Do No Harm Coalition called it, but it's a sound weapon. It causes severe distress, headaches, disorientation, temporary hearing loss. Of all of these weapons, the one that I hate the most is the LRAD. Not because it like actually causes a lot of like pain, but it's just, there's something unbearable about it. And the best way I can describe it is like wind buffeting in your car on the highway. If you've ever experienced that, you know, you want it to stop the instant it starts. It's absolutely terrible. The most important treatment for this, in my experience, is to calm people down. Give them earplugs, put on your earplugs, calm them down. It's stressful, but it's not, there's not a severe risk of long-term damage from it, except for hearing loss, of course, and we'll treat that with earplugs. This is some kind of miscellaneous ones. Tasers. I've never experienced somebody getting tased at like a demonstration before that I had to treat. I know that it's happened. I know that at the very least, the protests in DC after Trump was elected, there were people tased, but I just don't see it that often. Typically, police are using riot control, sort of more like menacing, like terror-inspiring weapons, and not really a taser, which is kind of an individual one-on-one weapon. But you might see it. The mechanism of injury is probably going to be a little bit surprising, more than the electrical burn aspect of it, which happens if somebody's tased directly on their skin. What you're really looking for is a fall from feet. So, or a fall from standing. So you're looking for, broken bones, concussion, that sort of thing. What you do have to be careful about, though, is dysrhythmia, so cardiac distress, respiratory distress, because obviously somebody's having an electric shock sent through their body. So if they have predisposition to being vulnerable to that kind of thing, then they might have a more long-lasting injury and a more serious injury like that. And then here's some less common ones. Batons. If you watch the news, you probably think that batons are used absolutely all the time. And they are, like, but the number of people who are actually injured by them is, in my opinion, less for batons, riot shields, police cruisers, horses, any of these things that are going to cause fairly traumatic blunt force trauma. But it's going to happen. You're going to come across people who have been, pushed to the ground, pushed into a building with a police shield from a police line, hit violently with what amounts to a baseball bat at this point. So you're going to see bruising, bleeding, contusions, fractures, head injuries. That's supposed to say head injuries and wounds. You're going to assess the patient for airway, breathing, circulation, for concussion. You're going to treat minor wounds. I advise everybody who's had a major head injury, and especially anybody who's had a head injury caused by a police weapon, to get them out of there, get them safe, because they may deteriorate very quickly in the environment of a protest, and then activate EMS, get them to a hospital. Everybody wants to be a hero, but no one wants to die of a traumatic head injury. So I try to encourage people to do that. Okay, so that is the long laundry list of all of the ways the police will try to hurt you at a protest or your patients. But these are more just things to do with, like, when people come. I'm sure you've all heard this and experienced this with COVID-19 patients. COVID-19 is a comorbidity, but it's not the only morbidity. Just because there's a pandemic doesn't mean, sorry about that. Just because there's a pandemic doesn't mean that no other illnesses or injuries exist. So these are what I would expect people to cause themselves through some sort of an accident, or more mental health emergencies and stuff like that. So I'm always on the lookout for respiratory distress and respiratory arrest. I see this fairly commonly at protests because people are having panic attacks. Panic attacks are fairly common in the first few days of protests. I think probably somebody who had a panic attack on day one is probably not having a panic attack anymore. So it is a little bit of an experience thing. But the first time that a flashbang goes off a couple feet from you, you may have a panic attack. I say this for you as well. If you've never been shot with a tear gas canister, you may have a panic attack. So when you're discussing your pearls with your medic buddy, maybe tell them, hey, I've never been at the receiving end of state repression and the tools that the police use for repression. So that may be something good to go through. But remember, illness, chronic conditions such as asthma, allergic reactions, emotional distress, overexertion, these are the things that I ask people explicitly about. Do you have any illnesses? Do you have any chronic conditions such as asthma? Do you have any, are you allergic to anything? Are you overexerted or, tired? How long have you been here? Those sorts of questions. And are, trying to figure out a way to ask, like, are you having any emotional distress? Are you having a panic attack? Something like that. And now, of course, COVID-19, I ask people, have you had a fever? Have you had a cough? Have you felt nauseous or dizzy or any of the other kind of leading signs? So, yeah. Also, sudden illness, these are the sorts of things that, and this is a little bit of the same list. These are 4, now 5 of the things that I have seen people go from, 100 to 0 nearly instantaneously. I'm sure that you all have as well with your patients in the hospital, but asthma is a biggie. If somebody gets a tear gas canister shot at them, or like they inhale a bunch of tear gas and they have asthma, they may never have known that they had asthma, but it's a chain reaction, as you know, that just kind of gets worse and worse in a spiral. So if you can carry a rescue inhaler, I recommend it. I don't have a prescription for a rescue inhaler, so I don't carry one. But allergies is another one. Somebody getting hit with a baton and inhaling tear gas is going to look kind of similar to them getting stung by a bee and having anaphylaxis. So ask them if they're allergic to anything. Diabetes, I try to just give out candy and fruit bars to everyone. Keep your blood sugar high, but it's a good thing to ask if people are diabetic, and if they are diabetic, do they take insulin? And then of course, stroke, and you want to look for fast face, arm, speech time. I'm assuming most of you probably know that, but you want to look, is the corner of their mouth and their eyes symmetrical? Are they able to keep their arms level? Is their speech slurred? Are they coherent? And then time, if they have any of those symptoms, get them out immediately. And then more common protest injuries. This is the kind of stuff that you guys were talking about right when we started. Y'all are seeing like a wide variety of injuries, which I think is partly due to the fact that many of you are collectivized in New York City, and the NYPD are particularly brutal. But you're going to see sprains and strains and breaks. People are going to roll their ankle. They're going to have wrist injuries. They're going to fall down and trip. They might have a break. I have splints for that, and then I would get them out. I recommend rice. I carry a brace with me if they absolutely need it. But yeah, you're going to see minor soft tissue injuries. Stop bleeding, dress the wound, assess them for further injuries. Don't spend too much time on it. And then burns, I see burns far too often, mostly from people being dumb, playing with fire, throwing back tear gas canisters with their bare hands, that kind of thing. I do carry burn cream and burn spray with me. So I recommend that as well. And then lastly, this is my last slide, so we'll open it up for discussion, is mental health first aid and aftercare. This could be slide like 1 through 50. Like mental health first aid is your greatest weapon against police terror. Their job is to make you scared and make things chaotic. Your job is to spread calm and make things less chaotic. So be kind to your patients, respect their wishes and their anonymity, assume that they've experienced trauma because they're at the protest. At the very least, they are experiencing trauma right now. And approach with trauma-informed care in mind. Keep in mind when you're approaching somebody, historically marginalized groups and the ways that the police have terrorized their communities. And also that protests themselves are traumatic. Yeah. And then lastly, be super kind to yourself. Go home and have a piece of cheesecake. If that's what you're into. Go home and watch the birds in your yard playing like nothing's wrong. And know that you may also experience, some post-traumatic stress, like some lasting stress responses. You might have trouble sleeping. You might have numbness and anxiety. You might have irritability. That's totally normal. It's healthy. I recommend that you ahead of time set up some kind of a buddy call, maybe with like your best friend, your most comforting person, maybe your mom or your dad or whomever, to say like, this just happened to me and it was shit. And everything was wrong and everything was bad. And I don't know if I did anything right. And yeah, and they'll tell you, no, you're great. This is super important work. You're fighting for justice. Thank you so much. So yeah, with that, thank you so much. I'm gonna kick it off to Q&A. I think somebody has the Q&A questions and all of that, right? So maybe y'all can ask me these questions. Trey, if you want to like moderate, or Jillian, if you want to moderate.
Isabelle, that was dope. Thank you so much. For sure, your experience on the streets definitely allowed for us to like visualize and imagine ourselves in the situation. I wanted to like give you a few minutes so that you can look over the Q&A, and if folks think of questions, go ahead and add to the Q&A section. In addition to these 6 in the chat, there are a few more questions. I'll just send it to you to your to like WhatsApp. Okay. Well, Isabelle gets a few minutes to like look over and prepare the responses. I wanted to just, oh, my bad. I wanted to convey a few things that are coming up. Tomorrow, there's going to be this training again at 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern. So if people miss like the first part, or if you want to share with coworkers, comrades, other healthcare workers you think would be interested in joining, feel free to send them the Google form that you signed up on, and encourage them to like just indicate that they can join on Saturday. In addition to this training, we're planning a panel next week, Black Struggle is Class Struggle. And we're having Chris Smalls, who's an Amazon warehouse worker in Staten Island who was fired after organizing a walkout during the pandemic crisis. We're gonna have Julia Wallace, who is a longtime socialist revolutionary organizer based in LA. who is also an essential worker. He is a caseworker who does outreach on Skid Row, and has been organizing against police brutality, sexism, transphobia, and capitalism for the last few decades. We will have a healthcare worker, somebody from our crew, probably me, even though many people can speak to what we've been trying to do organizing in the healthcare sector. So we'll share that hopefully it's cool that we share that through email and invite, and you can catch it on Left Voice Facebook live stream. If you guys want to, get more deeply involved, join us as a contingent of healthcare workers in the streets in New York particularly, or if you want to do interviews, graphics, write, translate, totally welcome your collaboration. Just email us, socialisthealthcareworkers@gmail.com, and let's talk. And then the last thing, recording. A few people asked about whether recording will be available. We will have a recording or live stream of this same training tomorrow. You don't have to come to this full training again, but you can check back on our Facebook page, and that will be available for you, for anyone that you want to share it with. Thank you so much for joining us. And Isabelle, if you want to address those questions. Also, Jillian, who was on lockup last night, if you want to share either before or after the Q&A, up to maybe Isabelle, whether or not you want more time, anything else about your experience on the streets, being arrested, the repression, and then marshalling / medicing over the last few days, that would be cool.
Isabelle, maybe you should go first. I think it's good to consolidate sort of the medical part so that we don't forget what we just learned before we answer all of the other questions. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure. I'll do that. Okay, so I'm just gonna go down the questions. All of these are awesome questions, and I feel prepared to answer them all. One of you, I accidentally answered your question. I'm sorry, Ellen. I swear I'll get to your question. For goggles, okay, for face shields. So I have been a part of a group in Portland, Oregon that has been 3D printing face shields for doctors and nurses and other medical staff in hospitals. And those 3D printed shields usually have a 3D printed part that comes here and a plastic face shield thing that goes over it and usually either clips in or whatever. And I wanted to mobilize our group to make face shields for protesters and especially for street medics. And what the conclusion that we came to was that 3D printed face shields and other and plastic injection molded face shields are a real hazard. If you get struck in the face with a rubber bullet or a tear gas canister, those are probably going to explode, and they may very well explode into your eyes and be worse than if you were wearing nothing at all. So that's one consideration. Now, if you're talking about a riot helmet with a face shield, by all means, go ahead and wear that. That's going to be great. If you're talking about a hard hat with a face shield that's made for construction work, wear that. A welding helmet will probably be fine. Yeah, they only give those to the cops. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, no, that's yes, really real. I also would not. If you have a face shield that you have from work, the kind that have the little foam on the front and are just basically thin plastic that probably all of you have worn a million times over the last 3 months, I'm mixed on that. It's not going to help with tear gas at all. It'll help with pepper spray. I don't think it'll help with a rubber bullet or a projectile at all. So use at your own risk. Understand that that's like the cloth masks, like or not the cloth mask, like the bandana mask of face shields. So yeah. Second question, where can you get all of this gear? I mean, I got most of my gear at Walmart. I made my pack for, I don't know, probably $60 or something like that. I super don't recommend getting a kit. Those kits are crazy expensive. I will give you a list of items in my pack. You can recreate it for a fourth of the price of a kit that you can buy online. Yeah, so there definitely are the question was, are there street medic organizations giving this out to volunteers? Totally are. The Rochester Street Medic Collective, I know, has gathered a ton of supplies that they're giving to street medics. Whether that means that they're giving them to anybody who's got medical training and comes in and says, I'm going to be a street medic, or whether they're giving it to collective folks, I'm not entirely sure. But if you came in and you said, I'm a doctor, nurse, physical therapist, whatever, and I went to a bridge training, can I get some medical supplies? I'm sure that they would say yes. If you cannot get your hands on all of these medical supplies that I have, you do always have the option of just carrying water and Band-Aids. Water, Band-Aids, snacks, super great. Those are great things to carry. I run with a primary agency as a volunteer. So here's the question. When I run with a primary agency as a volunteer, I'm under their policy, wondering if anyone has encountered this issue, and if a street medic work can affect your agency as you aren't under a different agency's policy. I'm sorry, I can't answer like agency specific questions. Really sorry. I will say from a street medic perspective, if you're an embedded medic, if you are a medic who is acting only in one particular group, we call that an affinity medic or an embedded medic, and that has an incredibly long history in street medicine. So that's totally normal from the street medic side.
Isabelle,
Okay, yeah.
sorry to interrupt you. Do you want to at some point share information about how to get in touch with the Rochester Street Medic Collective, particularly around the gear? If folks are giving out gear, how to
that's local. Yeah, that's going to be local to Rochester. Yeah, so you would pick it up in person probably. So I can't, I will share a document that has listed on it a fair number of street medic collectives in the United States. It's not 100% accurate, but it does have contact information for most of them. Ironically, it says that the Rochester the Rochester Street Medic Collective is inactive, which is not true. So there's that. It's not necessarily up to date. It's like taken care of by volunteers. So it's kind of a wiki, but yeah. Milk for pepper spray. So this is super important. Milk can spoil in the sun in 30 minutes. And if you're putting warm spoiled milk into somebody's eyes, you are going to cause conjunctivitis. So many people follow up milk. Milk feels good, right? And many people follow it up with water, which great. But what you're risking is that no one will follow it up with water, and you will wind up risking an eye infection for a patient that's just been tear gassed or pepper sprayed, and I would prefer to not do that. Yeah, I'll send out a copy of this slideshow. So also, yeah, we all love Trey. So. Okay, legal ramifications. This is an important question, and I want to answer it with like the Good Samaritan Law wiki up. So all 50 states have Good Samaritan laws. I cannot tell you the exact language of the Good Samaritan law in your state, but most of them have kind of the same sort of structure. And the idea is that if you have the training, so you're only working inside of your scope, you have the training, you have an imminent peril, which means that somebody near you has encountered a dangerous situation, and they need medical assistance. You're not being rewarded or compensated at all. All of the medical, like whatever, all the treatment that you're giving a person, that's the word. Sorry, it is still fairly early here. All of the treatment that you're giving somebody is completely without compensation. It's on a volunteer basis. And once you establish care, you have an obligation to remain, which means it's exactly the same as if you were treating a patient in a hospital or as an EMT. You cannot transfer care to somebody who has less experience and then also that you have consent. So the Good Samaritan law, the way that I structure, the way that I approach somebody, I tell them my scope. I tell them who I am. I tell them the scope of my training, and I ask for consent. That is establishing sort of a verbal paper trail of the Good Samaritan law. I don't think I've ever heard of any street medic being prosecuted or like being like sued or anything like that. And if they were, the Good Samaritan law would protect you. So, yeah. But do check into your state. I don't know how Alabama works. I only know New York and Oregon. So, okay. There were other questions, I think, right, in the chat, or is that everything?
You covered all of the questions. I think people asked again for a checklist for gear bag, website you can suggest for where people can find the supplies.
Okay, sure.
So what we could do is hit us up through email, ask us what resources you need, just because I don't want to abuse everyone's email and like fill people's inbox with stuff that they're not necessarily looking for. There's still a question about long-term legal ramifications from arrest. I wonder if Jillian and Elizabeth, if either of you all want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I can pop in on that. So I can't tell you what an arrest is going to look like for the rest of your career. We're probably in very different fields. I'm a software engineer. An arrest record sometimes looks cool for us, but I will say that civil rights arrests are quite often excluded from like background checks and stuff like that. If your case is dismissed and it's a civil rights dismissal, that carries with it some other like downgrading effects and stuff like that. I would say I always try not to get arrested. Nobody wants to be arrested, but it's pretty safe getting arrested, I would think, in a civil rights demonstration, because it's not going to show up in too many background checks, and who knows, it might get you brownie points. I don't know. Your mileage may vary.
Yeah, I wrote in the chat, but I'm really not concerned about my arrest. It was a summons for breaking the curfew. The story is that we were backing up the line with two other way more experienced medics than me. And, when on the strike of 8, the police were stalking us and kettling us and blocking us in. And at the strike of 8, I have video, hundreds of cops with riot gear just started descending upon the crowd. Since we were the back line, they arrested us first. They arrested me, and then my cop decided to play nice cop and let me go because I'm a nurse, but they arrested Mike. They arrested 2 other medics. And then they entered the crowd and started beating people with batons. They pepper sprayed some people. They put the leader of the march, who I was in a cell with, in a chokehold on the ground, but she had taken some courses about that. I probably could have avoided Mike and I probably could have avoided arrests a little bit better by sort of kind of moving away from when the cops were, since we were on the back line, we could have avoided arrests a little better. And that's something to think about. But there was also, at least for a crowd of 150, 15 or 20 medics. So losing a few wasn't the worst thing that could have happened. Although taking this training and listening to you, Isabelle, you know, it tells me like I probably could have been in a more tactical, strategic position and not right there in front of the cops as they were coming in. And that's something to think about. Now, if you get a summons, you just go to summons court, and sometimes you pay a ticket, but usually the judge will just kind of let it go. That's what I got, because later on in the night, I was on my way to jail with jail support people who in New York are essential workers and allowed out past curfew. The cops didn't obey that. They arrested me and 3 other jail support people as I was going to try to meet up with Mike. I have it all on tape. It's posted on Left Voice, the article that Trey posted. And there's another article about Mike getting arrested on Left Voice too. If you all want more information, just stay calm. Say to the police, I'm a nurse, I'm a medic, I have my ID in my bag. I have training, I only have medical supplies in my bag. Stay calm, don't antagonize the police when you're not in a good position, you know. Another role that we've taken at protest is when I'm not medicing, sometimes we'll marshal or something like that. So you don't always have to be a medic, but healthcare worker bodies on the lines, you know, blocking the intersection, stopping traffic so the march can continue, sending out messages to protesters and support that we support their cause is a great show of solidarity. What else was I gonna say? Many of you might not be comfortable being a street medic. It is very hectic out there right now and dangerous. However, there is a huge need for jail support medics right now. I'm getting a lot of texts in my inbox right now saying, we don't have anybody at One Police Plaza. We don't have anybody here. These people, when they get out of jail, they have broken hands, really swollen, they have abrasions. This is a more first aid level version of medicing, and you're very safe. You're not gonna get arrested. You're surrounded by a lot of other jail support people who have been there before and know what they're doing. They have snacks set up. They have funds that they're sending people home in Ubers and Lyfts from jail. They have water. They even give out cigarettes to people coming out of jail if they want to. So they have everything set up, and it's a much more supportive, you're less on your own environment. And if you want to get signed up for jail support medicing in New York, you can text me. I'll put you on on a chat list that I'm on, where they have sign-up sheets and things like that. They have all the supplies there. If you're gonna go street medic in New York, or if you're gonna go street medic in any other city, contact the jail support people in your city, and sometimes you can get supplies from them because people are donating a lot, and oftentimes there's way too many supplies sitting around at these stations that aren't needed. Just stay calm. You can't say stay safe anymore because it's not up to us. Other people are making us unsafe, but you can say stay smart. Don't be stupid. Be aware of your surroundings, and just remember that having healthcare workers out there right now, having medics out there, having people who care, it's really important right now. If you can even do one shift this week, a couple shifts, you know, please, like, sign up, find a way. It's really important. Don't be too insecure. I went out to jail. Like I said, a great way to start is jail support. I went out there having no experience whatsoever. You just go and you follow the instructions that Isabelle gave us about asking, like, about medical history, asking about injury, mechanism of injury, and doing basically basic first aid and you know, showing people solidarity from a healthcare perspective. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Like this seeing people who want to do this work, it makes everything you know, the world seem a little bit more like there's hope in it. So take care of yourselves first, and then go take care of other people because they need you.
I'm just answering that question. Yeah, breathing exercises is what I do for calming panic attacks. Somebody asked that.
Thank
That was
y'all.
it.
That's it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you everybody so much for coming. Take care.